Hereby call to order the Roseville City Council meeting for Monday, August 21st, 2023. Mr. Trudge, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Groff.
Here.
Councilmember Strad.
Here.
Councilmember Etten.
Here.
Councilmember Schroeder.
Here.
Mayor Rowe.
Here. And now we're hopefully got the furniture arranged properly. Sorry about that, folks.
There must be something wrong with it. When I went to hire it, it went all the way to the bottom.
So it's done budget cuts. All right. So we have the council introduced. We have our city manager, Pat Trudgeon, on my left at the end of the dais, as well as our city attorney, Rachel Tierney, on my right at the other end of the dais. And other staff, department heads, and guests will be introduced as agenda items come forward. I do want to remind folks, if you have a cell phone, to either silence it or otherwise assure that it doesn't disrupt the meeting. I don't believe we have any remote participants online this evening.
That's correct.
All right, so no need for instructions for those folks. With that, then we'll ask folks to stand if you're able for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, that then brings us to consideration of tonight's agenda, and I'll check, as I always do, to begin with staff to see if there are any changes from a staff perspective to our agenda this evening.
Mr. Mayor, staff has no changes.
All right. Then we'll check with the council. Are there any changes council would like to request, or any items on the consent agenda that council members might like to move for separate consideration? Councilmember Schroeder.
Yes, I'd like to remove F, the Laris contract.
Right, item 10F. All right. Any other council requested changes or items council members would like removed from the consent agenda? All right, and we'll do a quick check with folks in the audience this evening. If anybody is here to either make a comment or ask a question on an item in section 10 of our agenda, which is the consent agenda, starts at the bottom of the first page and continues on to the second page, items A through L. Normally, those items are taken up as a single motion with limited opportunity for discussion or input at the end of the meeting. However, if someone is here for one of those items, we can take that up earlier in the meeting, give you an opportunity to ask your question or make your comment. So I'll just check if anyone is here this evening for an item in section 10 of tonight's agenda. All right, seeing no one. Then I believe we have our agenda with the note that item 10F will be removed from the consent agenda for separate consideration at the request of Councilmember Schroeder. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Etten, seconded by Councilmember Strawn. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. We have our agenda for this evening. Next on our agenda is an opportunity for general public comment. We do provide an opportunity for members of the public to speak to items that are on our agenda as those items come up each evening or at each meeting. But we do also want to provide at the beginning of each meeting an opportunity for members of the public to speak to the council and the public on items that are either related to city business or maybe of interest to people in the community that are not on tonight's agenda. And so I believe we've got some members of the public who would wish to speak this evening under that category. So as they're coming up, I will just note that once again, by rules of the council, we ask folks to introduce themselves by name and street or address and address comments or questions to the council. And then we've got a 3-minute time limit per speaker. Hello and welcome.
Me?
Yep, go for it.
Okay. Hello, everyone. We're here tonight to thank you. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for the help that you gave us for Juneteenth of this year. It was a wonderful, exciting day. And I was in charge of weather, and I got a trophy for it. But
Were you in charge last year too?
No, last year.
Okay,
No, he's not. We just but he will be next year.
But I do want to thank you, because without you and the other sponsors, it would have been impossible to do what we did this year. Kathy?
And I just want to, I'm Catherine Mott from Do Good Roseville. I just wanted to thank you for a great opportunity to show what we can do when we do a public and a private collaboration on events. I mean, you know, we've been doing it for 5 years before, but once we moved and worked with the city, we could make it a much bigger event, invite many more vendors, many more businesses to have much more entertainment. We also thank Parks and Rec. We've got a little picture here from Matt of Matt the director of Parks and Rec helping us hang our bunting for that. So that was above and beyond as far as we were concerned. And so, again, just want to thank you for your continued support for that, and know that, we're always, we're ready to do other things as well. So this event started out just as a community event. It was friends getting together for Juneteenth and grew from there. Here's our hero. And so it grew from there. So we're actually looking for other opportunities with other groups within the community. So always we're willing to work on that and open to ideas from other people. But now we'll let Etienne speak.
You guys continue.
We did. We're done.
Well, I'm sorry I'm late. Etienne Javi, I'm part of the organizing committee for Juneteenth. Just wanted to thank the city, the council, and everyone who participated in making it what it was as a really good event. I think we heard word from pretty much everywhere in the state that Roseville is doing something different, and we look forward to next year and the cooperation between the Earth organizing group and the city, because I think this is giving the city a different light than what has perhaps happened in the past. But we are really excited for what's going on. So,
Well, thank you so much for those thanks, and we're glad as a city to partner with you and look forward to perhaps other opportunities as well. But I think it's, as you said, it's an example of how things can work when the government gets together with people who have creativity and energy and all those types of things to make things happen. So it's great to see. And Rick, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm sorry. My name is Rick Sanders. I live on McCarran Boulevard in Roseville.
Thanks so much.
He's here, but
Anything else?
this is a picture of Matt
Yeah.
that we wanted to present to him. You can see him up there
Right.
hanging the Juneteenth flyer. And for me, this picture means a lot in the sense that this is the director of Park and Rec in the whole city that is up there hanging a Juneteenth flyer. And it's not a surprise to anyone that he's a white man. And it's more telling than anything. To me, it means really a lot. So we just wanted to give that to Matt and present him this. And I don't know if he's here, but
He's trying to avoid coming up.
oh, it's a presentation
Yeah,
now.
the thing with Matt is, of course, that nobody else can touch the bunting.
We were ready to hang it ourselves.
I truly had.
Well, thanks again. We do look forward to next year and the event continuing to grow and become more and more successful and more meaningful for everybody who participates.
Thank you.
And if there's one more thing to add, perhaps is over time, people come and go, institutions stay. So if we get to a place where this becomes perhaps a City of Roseville event where people who are willing to participate in the city becomes part of the organizing, we are potentially not going to be here in 100 years. So
Well, I don't think we're going to allow you guys not to be here.
I'm getting old. Are you trying to tell me
And
something?
Well, you always have to do the weather. And I think one other thing too, I think that in the fact that as it grows each year, so one thing to know is that the event just doesn't stand by its own. So this year was the first year where, based on Etienne's idea, we had a career tent, so we could represent people representing different jobs within the community. And that's now, we're starting to have meetings with the schools to see if we can take that further and go into the schools. So it's kind of a starting point for other things within the community. And I think that's another thing, important part of what the event is, so. Thank you.
Absolutely.
so we may come back for more. That's what she's saying.
I All right. Thank you again.
Thank you.
For everything that you guys do in the community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll double check. Is there anyone else from the public who wishes to speak this evening in general public comment? Seeing no one, then we will move on with the rest of our agenda. Next on our agenda is recognitions and donations. And this evening, we've got one proclamation and also receiving an award. We'll begin with the proclamation. And as usual, I will read it, and then a motion from the council would be in order. And to save myself great embarrassment, I will be reading the English version of the Hispanic Heritage Month proclamation, but we do have a Spanish version available as well. The proclamation reads as follows. Whereas the City of Roseville recognizes and honors contributions of all members from our community, and whereas September 15th is the anniversary of independence for 5 Latin American countries, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua, and Mexico achieved independence on September 16th, and Chile achieved independence on September 18th. And whereas in 1988, the United States Congress adopted a resolution designating September 15th through October 15th of each year as National Hispanic Heritage Month. And whereas Hispanic Americans, being a rich cultural heritage representing many countries, ethnicities, and religious traditions which contribute to America's future. And whereas the Hispanic community has had a profound influence on our country through their strong commitment to family, faith, hard work, and services, and they have enhanced and shaped our national heritage with centuries-old traditions that reflect the multi-ethnic and multicultural customs of their community. And whereas during National Hispanic Heritage Month, the United States celebrates the culture and traditions of Spanish-speaking residents who trace their roots to Spain, Mexico, Central America, South America, and the Caribbean. And whereas the City of Roseville invites all members of the community to celebrate the 2023 Hispanic Heritage Month theme, Latinos Driving Prosperity, Power, and Progress in America, now therefore be it resolved that the City of Roseville hereby proclaims September 15th through October 15th to be Hispanic Heritage Month in the city.
So moved. Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Atten, seconded by Councilmember Groff. And I would just note for staff that there is a date error in the last whereas clause. So we've got the motion before us to adopt the Hispanic Heritage Month proclamation. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and that proclamation is adopted. That brings us then to our second item under recognitions and donations, and this is a recognition of the city with the League of Minnesota Cities Sustainable City Award, and we have our sustainability coordinator Noelle Bakken with us this evening, and she can correct her title if I demoted her to introduce this for us. Welcome,
It
Noelle.
was kind of a lateral move. So I am the sustainability specialist, but same difference. Today we are joined by Luke Fisher, the executive director of the League of Minnesota Cities, and as well as Larry Odebrecht. I have their names written down so I could pronounce them correctly. He is an LMC board member as well as a Stillwater council member. So thank you for taking the time to attend yet another council meeting tonight.
Can't get enough.
They are here to award us with the 2023 Sustainable City Award. The City of Roseville is really honored to receive this award in recognition of our work on our Energy Action Plan and our Partners in Energy program implementation.
That's great. Well, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to share some good news with you tonight. I'm Luke Fisher. I'm the executive director at the League. And we're really excited to spend some time here this evening, as you know, to present you with an award. Before we talk about the award, though, I always think it's interesting, like, who's giving this award? Like, why does this matter? Why is this important? And I'm going to lead off with a little bit of context about who we are as an association. And then I'm going to let Larry do the fun part, the recognition part, where we get to share part of your story. So as an association, the League of Minnesota Cities represents 838 of the state's 855 cities. Anybody want to guess who our largest member is?
Roseville.
Roseville? No. No. Close, very close. It's Minneapolis, right, with a population of 425,000. Our smallest member is the city of Barrie. Any guesses on Barrie's population at all?
10?
110? If we're playing Prices Right rules, you're out. So you're a little too high.
10.
10? You're close. It's got a population of about 19 people. So as an association, we are tasked with this really incredible opportunity to serve cities like Minneapolis, like Roseville, and like Barrie, and all points in between. How do we do that? When a member has a question about how to do something, they can call us and our research team will help. We advocate on behalf of cities at the state capitol every year. We do training for elected and appointed officials, and you guys have been to our training, so you know us well in that regard. And we provide insurance for our members, property, casualty, and workers' comp insurance. That all gives us a ton of opportunity to get to know who the best are in the state. We get to see the best. And we get to amplify the best, and we get to share the best stories. And tonight, that's what we're here to do. We're here to talk about you as being the best, as being leaders amongst peers, amongst cities in our state, with a program that we hope other people are willing to try, to emulate, to do in their own communities in their own way. And so to share a little bit about that, Larry, one of our board members and a council member from Stillwater, is going to talk a little bit about your project, and then we're going to play a video.
Yeah, so guys, one of the things that's very hard to do as a council member is to take a lap of credit for your good work. And so that's my role, is I get to share with your citizens some of the great work you're doing and some of the great work Ms. Bakken's done. This is personal to me. I am following in your footsteps. The city of Stillwater is following your footsteps. I'm leading our Partners in Energy project and am working with Excel. And as I was reading your award and reading what you're doing, it's pretty much a list of, here's the stuff that Stillwater is shooting for. So I can very much speak to how hard this is to get done and how hard it is to get done in a community way, which you have clearly done, which I think is great. That's one of the reasons why the league found fit to recognize you guys. So a couple things I want to call out for your citizens. Engaging your businesses, engaging your citizens in this, making them a part, reducing greenhouse gases, incredibly important, because this stuff doesn't happen inside, up on the dais up there. It happens out in the city, and it's about getting those passions and driving them into a direction. And I think that's where we as council members are at our best, is when we're taking the passion from our city and we're driving it. And great job with that. Inclusive planning, making sure everybody's got awareness of it, strong communication. I know you have the Green Step program, which Luke didn't touch on, is a similar league program. I know you guys are level 5 on Green Step, right? Which is amazing. That's the highest level that we have. So I know you've got, you've hit the best practices for efficient building, different benchmarks, green business development, and renewable energy, which is fantastic. And I know that the impressions and judges have been very impressed with the cooperation that the private and the nonprofit entities had with Excel Energy, who is a key partner in reducing energy across the state. So, I also wanted to touch on why this is important. Sustainability isn't just important because of some of the things that we see going on in the news. It affects the health and well-being of your citizens. It affects the economic and the ongoing viability of the economics. As a former business owner in Roseville, I can definitely appreciate that. And then climate change consideration is an obvious one. So that's what I wanted to share with you guys. I'm super proud of you. I'm super proud of you to be here to honor you with it. We've got a video to share that I think Luke wants to kick off, but I just want to say, Stillwater's right there following in your lead, and thank you guys for this. This is a really cool piece of work, and I hope your citizens appreciate the hard work that went into this and that you put into it.
Yeah, and if it's all right, we'll play the video that highlights the program that we played at our annual conference in June that something like 700 city officials from across the state had the opportunity to check out.
I was there. Everybody was watching.
The easy thing to tell people about Roseville is that we're perfectly positioned, conveniently located to both Minneapolis and St. Paul, and all of the amenities and arts and everything that's involved in culture in those two communities. But we're also a neighborhood unto ourselves, and we have a great opportunity for people to live, recreate in our great parks and recreation system, and a very vibrant and healthy business community.
The Sustainable Steward Program is a two-part program. One part is an annual cash award for larger scale projects, but we also wanted to expand it to include smaller scale actions that residents and small and medium-sized businesses can undertake, such as adopting a drain or doing a home energy squad audit or things like that.
In the last 10 years, we've really been focusing on sustainability and environmental issues throughout the community. It really started with Green Step Cities when we joined that program and have progressed through the steps, and now we're at step 5.
I was one of the folks that early in the Green Step Cities program encouraged the city to become involved in that program. And I think, early on saw the benefits of being able to do benchmarking, but also to look to what are best practices throughout the broader community in terms of cities looking to reduce their carbon footprint and improve their efficiency.
The Partners in Energy program for Roseville includes 4 specific goals. The first one is to reduce energy burden across the city. We also want to increase residential energy efficiency. We want to work with small and medium-sized businesses to increase their energy efficiency. And then finally, we want to work with residents and businesses across the city to adopt additional renewable energy.
The community is not defined just by the city government. It's defined by all the participants in the community, and that includes residents and businesses. And if all 3 of us are working together, I think we should have a great outcome.
So one of the things about the Partners in Energy program that was appealing to the city was the ability to use programs that Xcel Energy already has in place for both residents and businesses to improve their sustainability, reduce their carbon footprint, use more renewables.
I want to make sure that Roseville is a leader in sustainability and really leads by example on the efforts that they can do to show the rest of the community and how to reduce our carbon footprint and to make sure that the world's a better place in the future for our future generations.
And with that, we'd just like to present you with this award, and if it'd be possible, we'd like to get a picture with you all, and we'd just like to congratulate you on your success.
Well, thank you. And yeah, we'll take a quick break here so we can do a picture with the award. Everybody.
Otherwise, we can use my phone.
You have to be in it, though.
Oh, that's true. Well, someone can, everyone knows how to use iPhones.
You've also done your part to reduce energy consumption. I know you don't need much cooling anymore now. You're that beard, my
You have too much
goodness.
hair.
I make a joke, I wasn't gonna I have, yes.
What do you guys normally do your photos?
Behind the table?
Yeah, behind the table
Behind
here.
the table?
Yeah, center.
Okay, perfect.
Someone like to hold it.
I think you can hold it.
There's already a picture of him holding it.
That's great.
All right, everybody, here we go.
So you, congratulations, you have candy and. Well, oh, wait a minute, you've been in. I put it on selfie mode.
Oh, yeah. Imagine a fire chief doing that, right? Congratulations.
Thank you again.
Yeah, congratulations.
And if you need any help with Partners in Energy, I will.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Feel free to get in touch.
I will.
Think you get here early and.
What? Yeah, and then your chair breaks, and then your chair breaks. I mean, it went down to the bottom, but then it did go up.
It's hard. You have to get, there's a little trick to it. They'll get it to come up.
Yeah.
She ran away
Huh.
from the troll.
And for some reason, the people from the league didn't want to stay for the rest of our meeting. I don't understand. Well, we appreciate the recognition as a city, certainly, and thank staff and everybody who was involved. I know folks from Public Works and all through the city organization, as well as members of the community, were a big part of that process and continue to be a part of Partners in Energy as we go forward, too. So thanks again to everyone. That brings us then to items removed from our consent agenda. And we had the one item 10F. Mr. Trudgeon, if you could introduce that item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 10F approves entering into an agreement with Alaris for our flexible benefit and COBRA administration. The COBRA administration covers employees that are no longer with the organization that can still receive health insurance benefits, set up as a separate law. So we are looking to change vendors on that, and we are looking to enter into contract with Alaris. We did receive 2 proposals, one from Alaris and one from another company, and chose Alaris as the best company for us to move forward with. The total contract we expect to be about $5,100.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. And Councilmember Schroeder, you'd asked for this item to be removed, so I'll recognize you for comment or question.
Yes, thank you. First, I just wanted to start with, I don't have an issue with who the choice was for the vendor of Alaris. What I wanted to talk about was that there was a few details missing in this presentation, and thank you, Pat and staff, for providing that for me. What I'd like to see going forward are some of those details in future packets. For example, for me, I need to see the current vendor, what are the names of the other companies that have bids from, and also the cost. It wasn't apparent how much this contract was worth. And I know there are other things involved other than the cost, but that's important for me. And I know usually there's a spreadsheet, and I know you provided one, that usually shows this is a current vendor, and this is what it costs, and all the items, and then here are your bids, and it shows each of the line items, and then what the total cost of who's bidding, and then you have these other items you have in here that we're considering. But for me, it would be very helpful to have this information in the packet to start with, so I don't have to come back and ask you for it. So that's why I wanted to pull it.
Great, thank you. Any other council members have questions or feedback on this item? Otherwise, a motion would be in order to approve the going with Alaris as the provider on this.
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Strawn, seconded by Councilmember Groff. Discussion on the motion. As the maker of the motion, Councilmember Strawn, anything?
Just being in HR, I've had really good service with Alaris myself, so I support the use of this, especially in light of them being of relatively similar cost and hopefully a better service than what has been experienced.
Has the seconder anything to add?
Nothing else.
Okay. Any other discussion on the motion? Councilmember Adams?
I would note, I think we kind of look for this kind of information that Councilmember Short has brought up as just part of our practice as much as possible, so that we have the complete information that the community understands kind of what we're looking at. So appreciate that.
All right, and thank you. And I would just note, I concur. I think the key piece of it is for the public to have a good understanding of our decision-making. Certainly, it's important for us to know because we're acting on behalf of the public, but I think as part of the transparency for the members of the public who are following our decision-making, or for the record for the future, it's important to have a complete reporting on that as part of the request for council action. So with that, we've got the motion before us to approve that going into a contract with Alaris. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and that is approved. Thank you, everyone. That brings us then back to our regular agenda. We've got 4 business items this evening. Our first business item is to consider amending City Code Chapter 316 as it relates to sales of THC products. And I'll turn it back over to Mr. Trudgeon for introduction of this item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As noted in the case, we did talk about this at our last council meeting about looking at making some changes to our current regulations regarding THC sales. I would note that in the future, the state will be taking this all over at some undefined date, but in the meantime, we do want to sort this out a little bit. As you know, we currently have a cap of 8 THC licenses, and we have 8. I list the licensees in the staff report. One of the changes that the legislature did as part of the overall cannabis bill was to allow liquor stores themselves to now sell THC products where it was previously expressly prohibited. So that's one change that has occurred, and you will note that we have 2 liquor stores that currently receive a license. We, of course, are at our cap, so we cannot issue any more. So we wanted to bring back a conversation about looking at that cap and maybe how to deal with it. So as a result, we have in front of you tonight an ordinance that does a couple things. One, it removes the prohibition that we also had in our ordinance that was in the state law about exclusive liquor stores holding a THC license. So on lines 49 and 50, we remove that definition of a liquor store, and then later in the code, on lines 153 to 155, we also take out a reference to liquor stores as well. Then we also modified in the ordinance, and let me just pull that up, on line, really starting at 79 to 83, and talking about who could have a license. And after some discussion, it was felt that we would keep the age-restricted establishment, which we define as some place that prohibits people under 21 from entering and has got certain requirements, as a separate entrance and some other construction material, or an establishment holding a license issued under Roseville City Code Chapter 302. I would note this morning I sent modification to that. We were referring to originally state statutes about liquor licenses, but since that's pretty expansive as the amount of liquor licenses, in Chapter 302 we specifically define what licenses we would grant for liquor. It was a better reference point. So anybody that holds a license under Chapter 302 of our code. So think about the on-sale and the off-sale varieties that we have. So they would be able to get a license. There'd be kind of a separate category, if you can imagine in your mind, than the age-restricted, even though there often are age-restricted. And then further on with the cap, we are keeping the cap. This is on line 141 at 8. But we are saying that if you hold a license under Chapter 302 or some type of liquor license from the city, the cap does not apply to you. So we'd still have 8 age-restricted and essentially unlimited for THC. This would allow the liquor stores to do that, as well as restaurants to serve THC beverages. We would still require them to get a license through the city. It just would not count against the cap. So if you go to the top of the RCA, you'll see we have 8 listed there. 3 of them are liquor license holders, so that would make 3 available for age-restricted establishments to have it. We anticipate that we probably won't get too many more, and we'll see, but we'll get a lot of interest from the restaurants and the liquor stores as we move forward here. So that's in a nutshell what the ordinance changes are, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. And just to clarify once again, this is strictly related to the THC products.
Just THC.
This doesn't get into licensing or provisions for the sale of anything besides that related to the law change that was
Correct.
done by the legislature. All right. Questions from the council for staff? Councilmember Strawn.
I don't see anything mentioned here. Is there an additional cost to have a THC license added to your liquor license?
The fee is, I'm trying to remember what the fee is, but there'd be separate THC license fees, so they would have to pay that. So it won't be part of a liquor license, it'd be a separate license that's approved by the council, and whatever that fee is, they would apply through the city and come to the city council for approval. I
Thank
might have
you.
had that in my staff report, I can't remember.
Right. Other questions for staff? All right. And I do.
I'm sorry, the
oh,
license fee is $300
$300,
annually.
okay.
Thank you, yeah.
And as you said, it would be a separate additional license in addition
That's
to the
correct.
liquor license. Right. All right. Councilmember Strawn.
Just one additional question then, as far as compliance, would that be confirming that if there was a random check that people had obtained their proper licenses as well?
Yeah, so typically when we go in to verify, to make sure they're not selling to persons under 21, we go through a process where we have somebody underage try to purchase a product. At that point, we would also want to make sure that they actually have a license. Now, it's a good question because there's probably more that are out there selling that we may not know of, so it'll take us a little while to get caught up in that respect, because what we give the police department here, the licensees, go check it. But if they don't have a license, we may not know to check it. So we're gonna have to do some diligent work on our part, some due diligence to make sure that the places where we would expect it to be sold actually have a license. So one of the things we will be doing is sending out information about the need for a license to all liquor license holders, so they are well aware of it, put them on notice. And I think as we look at our first check, we would go to all those current liquor license holders just to verify that they have a license and are complying with the law. But yeah, it's going to be a big task as we get moving forward. Here's one more thing to check.
Yeah, because I know I've seen THC beverages, and I'm not checking content, so I don't know for sure, but at like coffee shops and other things too, so.
No, that's important. I think we need to have a pretty good, robust communication
Yep.
about what is required to sell these products in the city of Roseville too, so. Other questions for staff? All right. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this item this evening? We've got this ordinance change proposal before us, and actually, I think we've only got one member of the public here, so it's going to be easy to check. No? All right. All right. With that, then, we'll proceed to council consideration. We've got the request before us to approve the ordinance, and of course, this will be the bench handout version of the ordinance with change to the reference to the city code for the licenses, as well as the change on line 82 saying or instead of and, so that we don't require our licensees to have both the liquor license and the age restricted, which wasn't the intent. With that, is there a motion related to the adoption of this ordinance?
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Strawn, second by Councilmember Groff to approve the ordinance as presented in the bench handout. Discussion on the motion. As the maker of the motion, Councilmember Strawn.
Nothing further.
All right, Councilmember Groff as the seconder.
Nope, thanks.
All right, additional discussion on the motion? Oh, Mr. Trudgeon.
If I can mention, my apologies, we don't have a physical bench handout for those that have a paper packet. And we can take a pause, I can print them off, or I could just talk exactly what the changes were.
Maybe you can bring it up on the screen just to double check for
Yeah, I'll
folks.
have to.
Just read it,
Okay.
please.
So the changes are fairly straightforward. So on line 82, we switched word "and" to "or." So you don't need both. It's either a liquor license or an age-restricted establishment. So strike the word "and" with the word "or." And then instead of the, I think it's 340A, the state statute section, we replace that with Roseville City Code, Chapter 302, on line 82 and 83. So just swap that out and swap the word "and" for.
And that's what we received in our email.
Yes, and my apologies that it wasn't printed. I thought it was.
And I believe also on line 143 and 44, also the change to the reference to the state statutes
Right.
to be consistent.
Yes, I'm sorry, yeah. That's a cap on total licenses.
Right.
So instead of referring to the state statutes, it refers to the city code.
And
And that's just some number changes as far as reference points and an or. See that on line 143?
Yeah.
And so it's clear that the cap of 8 is still in place, but an exception to that is any liquor license holder that wishes to have a license doesn't apply towards the cap.
And that was a good addition, because I read that a couple times puzzling on it, and then I saw your note, so thanks.
All right, just to make sure we're all clear on what we're going to be voting on here. I appreciate that. And just to double check, do we have an ordinance summary with this
We
one
do.
as well? Good, okay, yep. All right, so we've got the motion before us to adopt the ordinance, essentially amending Chapter 316 of the City Code as outlined in our discussion in the materials this evening. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. That ordinance is approved. And then, as noted, we do have an ordinance summary, which allows us to print a summary in our official publication instead of printing the whole ordinance. That does require a 2/3 majority of the council, which would be 4/5 in our case. Mr. Trudgeon.
And I would just note the summary should be swapped out under Minnesota statute, section 340A should refer to chapter 302 of the code. We did not catch that.
All right, so we'll make sure that that is covered in the actual publication. All right, with that, we've got the request for a summary. Is there a motion to allow for publication of an ordinance summary?
So moved.
Second.
It's moved by Councilmember Ratten, seconded by Councilmember Schroeder. Once again, does require that 4/5 majority. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? That passes unanimously, meeting the requirement of the supermajority. Thank you, everyone, for the work on this, and we'll make sure that those final copies are correct and reflect the language as discussed. Then we have our first opportunity to hear from the city manager as to the proposed budget and tax levy for the city of Roseville for 2023. This is one step in the many steps of our budget calendar each year. We will have, after tonight's presentation, an opportunity for the Finance Commission to weigh in on the budget and provide recommendations to the council, which we'll hear at an upcoming meeting. In September, we'll have we are required by the state by the end of September to pass a not-to-exceed amount for our levy in our preliminary budget. And then by the end of the year, we need to adopt our final budget and tax levy. And as noted with the not-to-exceed comment, we can't go up from our September levy unless there's certain extenuating circumstances, which usually don't happen, but we can go down. So with that, I will turn it over to City Manager Trudgeon to introduce his proposed 2024, I should say, I think I said 2023, 2024 budget and city tax levy, and we'll receive that this evening. Mr. Trudgeon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. I'm pleased to be here tonight to introduce the budget here. There's a lot of information in your packet. Mayor, you introduced some of the topics, kind of the kickoff here in the first slide about the steps in the process here. So tonight's really for you to receive information and certainly ask any questions. There's no decisions tonight. The first decision point will be September 25th and the not-to-exceed levy, and then there's additional dates as we get into the fall, into the winter, to the end of the year. So before I get into the details of my proposed budget, I just want to share a couple observations that kind of shape this budget. This budget does maintain all of our existing programs and personnel, so all the things that we have typically done in this past year will continue moving forward. We do see some general inflationary pressure, maybe not as bad as the last budget. A good example is the fuel prices, where we were really concerned last year and put some additional dollars in. Glad to say that those did stabilize, so we did not have to dip into the reserves to do that, at least so far, here in 2023, but we still have some inflationary pressures. However, the biggest impact, and I note this throughout my presentation, is the cost to implement the classification and compensation study. And we'll get into more details about that, but that's really the cost driver. So as you see these numbers, that is something that's really affecting what we have in front of you tonight. So just take a step back here. So each year as a department head team, we do sit down and look at our organizational priorities. These aren't necessarily directly budget priorities, but they help set priorities as we look to do our work plans and certainly with our budget requests. So we had 6 different priorities, and if you've seen them in the past, they're fairly similar to what we've had before, but let me just read them real quickly here. So for one of the priorities is about people, maintain a workforce that attracts and retains a diverse pool of top talent. Equity and inclusion, integrate equity and inclusion into all organizational processes, procedures, and decisions. 3, elevate environmental sustainability, prioritize and incorporate sustainability initiatives into all we do, such as programs, projects, plans, and events. Foster community success, create and provide opportunities for the Roseville community to thrive and succeed. Consider engagement, normalize the concept of engaging stakeholders according to the IAP2 spectrum on decisions affecting them. And then finally, provide a modern and sustainable infrastructure, which states ensure the city's infrastructure is functioning within expectations, receive proper maintenance, and has a fiscally sustainable replacement program. In your packet as an attachment is some more detail about how we put that to action. Obviously, one budget cycle can't do it all, but we try to incorporate as much as we can. Some of it's already kind of in our normal operational procedures, but other ones, they're also aspirational and things that we need to try to get to. So this is something that does help shape the department head's budget requests that come to me, and something that I look at as well, and just wanted to point that out as a point of reference as we move forward. So specifically to this budget, and I talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but really 3 strategies that I put together that's really driving this budget. One is to provide for a modern and sustainable infrastructure. 2 is an investment to main city programs and the workforce. And 3rd is strategic use of grant funding. I would note in the past we've also, that last bullet point was around reserves. We are not proposing to use any reserves this year beyond capital fund reserves. In the past, we've kind of patched it together, but this year, I'm not proposing to do any of that. So let's talk a little bit about the overall numbers on the budget. The budget, as presented to you tonight, is $69,637,928. Let me say that again, 69 million, that's a big number, 637,928. That's an overall increase of 13.5%, so pretty sizable jump. As most of you know, that the budget increase, while tied to the levy, isn't the same as the levy increase. There's a lot of reasons why budgets may go up. There might be larger capital expenditures. I think this year we're seeing the cost drivers also being the class and compensation study. And there are some inflationary, especially electric utilities for all our facilities, projected to go up. And then also the utility charges from our utilities, the water and sewer, those charges are going up. So that's all built into the budget. So it is a big jump. It stood out to me, certainly, but there are some reasons for that. So as we look at the budget and how it's divvied up here, on the top shows a table of kind of our main functions and what part of the budget goes towards operations, towards capital, and then interest and debt. You can see our largest expenditure is water, sewer, and storm. That's primarily payments we make to the providers of those, whether that is St. Paul Water or Met Council, and those are recovered in user fees. After that, police comes in at 11.8 million and Parks and Rec at 10.1. And you can kind of see the breakdown of what that looks like for each. The other funding category covers license center, community development, TIF payments, and things like that. That adds up to also a sizable amount of $6.7 million. So I'd like to just use this as a reference to kind of see where we've been and where we're going. As you can see, the budget amount has fluctuated over the years, once again, depending on the need of what we're doing each year. And some of it is driven by capital, some of it's driven by some other forces here. So you can see we've kind of been up and down. This year certainly is higher than we've ever been, and something that was a big jump from the previous year. The levy is a little bit more of a straighter curve, I guess. It is up, as you can see, over a period of time. Looking for the total tax levy at $28.7 million, or a levy increase of $2.3 million. As you look at percentage, technically we weigh just under 9%, 8.99%. We'll call it 9%. You can see where we've been. I think for you council members that have worked with me on budgets, you know I like to get much lower than this to try to hit around the 5% mark. This year found it not possible given some of the things that we had to plan for, and we'll talk about what that number means and where we can maybe go with that here in a second. So this is in the budget memo. This has a lot of information, just talks about, kind of divides up kind of where it's all going, whether it's the property tax supported part of the budget, the fees supported, and how much go to personnel services. As you can see, $27 million of that does, of our budget does go to personnel. Supplies, materials, other services and charges, once again, a big number. That's payments to sewer and water and other money that goes back and forth through fees. Capital outlay, debt service, and TIF. You can see our tax levy summary of $28 million, $22 million goes to, almost $23 million goes to operations, 3.7 go to capital, and about 2.2 go to debt. So the summary of the proposed changes in the budget, we have some reclassification of personnel, and we'll get into these details, as well as compensation adjustments. You can see that is the really big number that we have. We have increased costs for supplies and contracts, and as I'll note a little bit later, we are shifting some of our capital levy dollars to operations to offset the needed increase. One thing that we do like to talk about this time of year is what the impact to the median valued home would be with my proposed budget. Unfortunately, we cannot say that with any certitude. We're going to be getting something, is it later this week?
Thursday.
So just right after this meeting, where we'll get final numbers from the county, especially around fiscal disparity, that we can make the final calculations. Once that is available, I will update this memo. I will also push that out to the council so you can see what that is, and we'll put that on our website so residents can see what that is. Just for a point of reference, though, the overall market value, and this has been shared with the council before, increased 6.65% versus 12.99% in 2022. Single-family homes increased 4.35%, while commercial properties increased at a higher rate, which most likely will lead to a shift of the tax burden more towards the commercial sector. To what extent, it's hard to say at this point, so we'll have that further information. I know that's a really important piece of information, but as we sit here today, we can't say that. We tried to estimate last year and we were wrong, so we do not want to do that again, period. End of conversation. So we want to just wait a few more days to get that. And you will note also later on that I'm also asking you to wait on some other things with the compensation and classification as we get that information. So hate to do this, I'm trying to give you as much as we can, but it's not a full story, so I don't expect you to really reach any conclusion tonight, certainly regardless of having that information or not, but I'm giving you even less information than typical, so just want to note that. So let's talk a little about specifics here. One of the priorities was provide a modern and sustainable infrastructure. And the net effect here is we're going to be shifting $160,000 from the current levy that goes towards capital now to operations. And what we're looking to do is remove $10,000 of annual levy support from the administration equipment fund, $25,000 from the central services fund, and $125,000 annually from the facilities funds. That would be permanently moved over to the operations side to provide levy support on that. In the memo, I have charts showing kind of what it was before and what it's after, and we feel that that can be done
very easily without affecting the long-term viability. As you know, we do look at each fund every year, and we do make adjustments every year. Our assumptions today are different a year from now, so, but that, as we look today, that will be sustainable into the future. Then we have this IT fund that we are going to dismantle and reallocate to other funds that are in great need. So administration equipment fund, we're kind of doing both. We're taking off some annual levy support, but putting a one-time injection of $50,000. That doesn't have a huge amount of expenditures, so that amount really does help a lot and help sustain that. The fire vehicle and equipment fund, we put $233,000. These are all one-time investments. Park and Rec Vehicle Equipment Fund, $127,000. The Finance Equipment Fund, $100,000. And the Streetlight Maintenance Fund, $300,000. As you recall, the Streetlight Maintenance Fund costs have jumped up exorbitantly, given that we are now owners of a lot of our streetlights that are at the end of their 25, 30-year contract with Excel. So we do need to plan accordingly in the future for that, and this will go a long way in really helping stabilize that fund at least over the next couple of years. So we are moving, as I said, dollars, both levy dollars, but also dollars within the capital fund world into different funds to help stabilize those funds, and be happy to answer any questions you have on those as we move forward here. We don't have complete knowledge that we're going to have all that money, what's a better way to say it? We don't have complete confidence that, not confidence, I'm stumbling over my words. As you can see from the charts, we don't have full funding for the next 20 years for some of these funds. We need to do some additional work. So this is only a step in the way, but it does go a long way for the near future and the medium future to really stabilize what we are seeing as our needs into the future. Next is the investment in maintaining city programs and workforce. This is where all the levy dollars are really going. Just talk about the reclassification of the personnel. Really not doing much there at this point. We are reclassifying the administrative community service officer from 0.8 to 1 FTE. That used to be a full-time position. We reduced that a couple years ago. We're finding with the churn that we have with applicants and people going through the system, we really need a full-time position. I'm proposing to fund that differential this year with the public safety aid, so there's no actual levy dollars. That's what that asterisk is. We do have some savings from a reclassification of a public works maintenance specialist to an office assistant. We are looking to increase the hours for administration department intern and 3 police department interns. We are finding that we can get a lot of work through intern work, and especially in the police department, that leads to future officers for us potentially. So we really feel that that's important. We currently have interns, but this would increase the hours to 1,080 per year, so kind of half-time versus just summer time interns. We also want to keep focusing on Park and Rec seasonal pay. This is not only just upping the amount we would pay per hour, but the safe and sick leave, we do need to start dealing with that. That's something that we do not provide any of those benefits, and that's something that we have to factor in. That's a little bit of an unknown. We can quantify it to some extent, but it's going to be a really complicated process. So we do need to put some funds away there. And then finally, the council members that have been on for a few years recognize this SAFER grant. This is the final year of the $200,000 of levy support. The last 2 years, we've been adding $200,000 of levy support each year, putting it into the police equipment fund, but this year we need to have that fully into the levies. We'll take that 400 plus another 200, so that's a cost driver that we knew was coming down the road. For new personnel, really not adding any personnel beyond commitment to diversity firefighter. This would not be necessarily a staffed position. This would be a position similar to the police department commitment on diversity, where we would allow for the fire department to go over the staffed amount of firefighters, which is 24. If we have a minority in firefighting that is a potential candidate to be a full-time firefighter. We do have a cadet program, and so we would like to go through that process. If we have a cadet that's ready to serve as a firefighter, we would temporarily have that person serve. So it would be over the number of allowed staff persons until such time there's a vacancy. So we are allocating public safety dollars to pay for that, as well as the police commitment to diversity. The expectation is not going to be filled all year. It may not be filled at all next year, but we're putting money aside. Not levy dollars, but public safety aid that we've gotten from the state. So it really has no levy impact. There were 4 other positions that were
proposed as part of the budget, a human resources assistant, a workforce development supervisor in the Parks and Rec Department, a housing inspector for the fire department, something that has been brought forward before, as well as a commander level position in the police department. In the end, I'm not including any of those positions in, mostly for the cost impact they would have. I think they're all needed in their own way, and I think they're necessary at some point for us to consider, but it just can't fit that into this year's budget with all the other needs that we have here. I did include memos in the packet for you to take a look at, just to provide you some background on that. So just wanted to make you all aware of those position requests, but at this point, I am not adding them into the budget. So where the really big costs are the compensation adjustments. Let me start with maybe the more straightforward one is the COLA, cost of living adjustment of 3%. We're proposing a 3% COLA. We have a couple union contracts that go through into next year at 3%. 3% seems like a reasonable cost of living adjustment, given the cost of living that has we've all faced in the last couple of years here. So 3% seems pretty reasonable and pretty straightforward, and that's $477,000 of actual levy dollars. The other two, I do want to put towards implementation of the classification and compensation study. You see the employee step increases. Every year we do have this line item. We have estimated it to be $366,890. That's using our current compensation system. If we go with a new classification and compensation system, that number is going to be off anyway, but that's a number we can use to put into trying to implement the overall compensation plan. In addition, I have added nearly $660,000 to implement the plan as well. So that's about $1 million. I'll pause there. That's $1 million to implement the classification and compensation plan. We don't have numbers yet to exactly know where we're going to end. We've seen some very, very preliminary numbers and smaller subsets of employees, so it's really hard to say. I'm trying to create enough room in this budget to allow for full implementation. I think it's so important that we don't take half measures in trying to implement this, but I just don't know what that number is. My hope, and I have nothing to base this on, that the actual implementation number will come a little bit lower and we can start chipping away at this, but I'd rather start high and go from there and see where we can be. Ultimately, the decision will be the council's, both on the budget, but also the implementation of the classification and compensation. So I do want to leave enough room in there for us to have a full discussion on it. We will expect to have the final report at the beginning of September, and probably have a council discussion about those results separate from the budget process. But we will have that information for you to be considered as part of the not to exceed levy date. So we'll have that information there so we can make a better informed decision on there. I recognize it is a lot of money. I recognize that it's going towards something that maybe residents are going to see value from or see on a day-to-day basis. But as we talked about who makes up our services and our programs, it is employees, and it's really important that we make sure we invest in them properly. And it's even more urgent now given the job situation out there, making sure that we're an attractive employer, not just for new people coming in, but also retaining employees. But I recognize it's a big number, so we'll keep working on that and see where we can end up, and we'll have those conversations as we move forward. Then the last couple things are just the increase in supplies, operations, and contracts. This is kind of everything else. And then offset by the drop in the levy, the shift of the levy from the capital to the operations. So strategic use of grant funding. As I mentioned, no reserves, so this is no new levy. ARPA funds in 2024 budget. We've talked a lot about this over the years, and I have a sheet that shows that breakdown. We'll go over that in a second. Something that's a little bit newer is we are part of a national settlement for opioids, and we are receiving funds, and we'll receive funds for the next 15 years. And what we are proposing in this 24 budget is to fund the remaining portion of the housing navigator position that's not grant funded. It kind of leaks into 24 for a few months through the opioid grants. We are also aware there's a separate state grant that's right on point for a housing navigator that we're going to apply for as well. So either it's opioid dollars or the state funds, state grant funds. It just opened up for consideration, so we won't know for a little bit, but we will want to have that grant funds. We know that housing navigator is a very, very important position. We want to make sure it's kept on our staff, and at some point, we may need to put it on a levy, but we're going to try to use grant dollars as much as possible. So, since oftentimes what the housing navigator is dealing with is drug addiction, especially with opioids, this is a very practical use of those funds. And we've collected more than that already, and we'll collect, I think, was it 400,000 or 500,000 over 15 years. So it's not going to fund it forever, but it's certainly enough dollars to get us by the next couple years. And then finally, the public safety aid, and I have a slide on this too, received nearly $1.6 million of one-time money as part of the state of Minnesota budget that can be put towards public safety, and I do have about $1.3 million shown as that. So this is really small, so my apologies if you can't read it. Hopefully you can see it in the packet. Really what you want to look at is the 24 column, which is the second from the right, where we have $125,000 for the embedded social worker. This is something that we have talked about for the last couple of years and funded through ARPA dollars, so we'll continue that. We have a couple of miscellaneous social media engagement software tools we just haven't done. This is something we identified a couple of years ago. We just haven't pulled the trigger on that as we're looking at exactly what the best fit is, and that's $18,000. Going down the list, we have a small business grant program through the EDA that you've allocated dollars for in a previous action, as well as the land trust grant. Those two middle columns it shows the expenditures through June 30th, 2023, and the other column was what's remaining. So there might be some additional dollars left after all this. We'll have to see. I'll note one big one is the $200,000 for the wayfinding signs. We are working with Visit Roseville. They have a study done. There's some challenges on sign locations since a lot of prime spots are county and state roads, and it's not necessarily going to be allowed on those roads, so we're trying to work through some of that. At some point, we'll bring back another conversation with the council on that as we move forward on that. But that money is allocated for that. But so for 2024, small business grant and the affordable housing land trust. And then the last piece is really to use the remaining balance of $638,000 for water capital projects. This would go into our water fund. We did that last year at $500,000. The remaining dollars is $638,000, so we're going to put that remaining amount to really help balance the funds. And the chart that you see in the CIP does factor that in, so just so you're aware. So that would leave us on paper at least with $0, and we've expended all that. As you know, the ARPA funding was originally said it had to be expended by 2024. We took the exemption, so technically we're not bound by that, but we did want to live within that parameter as well as a category, so I think we'll come pretty close. There might be some extra dollars as we move through 24 that we'll have to talk about how we want to expend if there's some leftovers at the end. But that's how we're spending the ARPA dollars. For the public safety aid, $1.6 million roughly, putting $500,000 in each equipment and vehicle fund for the police department and fire department. We brought that up before. Looking to extend or to use some of these funds to help us on the operations budget side, so that the administration CSO. Also, we have some increased costs in police department wellness, $30,000. We also have some additional IT costs for some new standards by the BCA for security, $16,000. Increase in fire department wellness costs, $16,000. The increase in dispatch services through Ramsey County, $40,000. So those are real costs that we need to factor in. The commitment to diversity for the police department and fire department are once again items that we want to have funding for if we do need to use it. We don't anticipate that we would need to use all those funds or any of those funds. As you know, the commitment to diversity police officer has been around for 4 years at least, and we haven't tapped into that just because of the vacancies that we've had. So this release on paper show a funding source. It wouldn't mean the funds are actually spent, but we wanted to reserve those out a little bit. So after all that, it's about $1.3 million of being used. There is no time frame to use these funds, so we can hold off on these. It's about $250,000 or so remaining that could be used, certainly, I suppose, in this budget cycle or into future budget cycles
once again, limited but for public safety purchases. So that's how that shakes out. The last thing I do want to mention is we've talked about using funds to help our operations. We know at some point that's going to have to come back to us and something we'll need to do. So I just try to outline what those would be. The first four are public safety dollars we just talked about. And those would have to be picked up by the levy unless there's other funding sources we find. The second embedded social worker in the 25 budget will need to be picked up through the levy unless we can find some other grant funds. And same with the police department, housing navigator. Right now we're planning on using opioid settlements if we get a grant. That'd be great. That would go into 25 hopefully, but otherwise the levies. So if we receive no more grant dollars, what we have committed as part of this 24 budget that are using grant funds is $325,000 roughly. So that's another big number that we need to be aware of. You know, I'm reasonably confident that we can maybe find some grant dollars for other things, those last two, but those top four are things that we're going to need to put in the levy. And my decision was to put that off, put it in the levy this year, given all the other pressures, and use our funding from the public safety aid this year to help us get into next year. So I'll just wrap it up here. Here's the dates. The Finance Commission, I'll be coming Wednesday, right? To the Finance Commission to present the budget. They have seen the CIP initially, so we'll talk about that, but they'll come back on September 18th to give their recommendation to you about the budget. And then 25th, they adopt the preliminary city levy and EDA levy and budget. Later in November, we'll look at the utility rates and fee schedule, which are all part of the revenue stream. Conduct the public hearing on November 27th, and then December 4th, look to adopt all those items for final approval in our last meeting of the year. So, once again, here is kind of the nuts and bolts of the budget and the levy increase and what the priorities are. And typically, like I said, I used to have what the impact would be to the median valued home, but I don't have that here tonight. So there's a couple things I'm going to just ask you to be patient on. One would be the impact, and another one would be the actual classification and compensation and what that looks like. And fortunately, we do have some time to get those answers for you, and you will have them before we get to the not-to-exceed levy. So with that, I will pause and be happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. A lot of information there. Questions from the council, understanding that we'll have other opportunities to have this, get into a lot of details, and this is a lot to digest on one evening. The normal process is that we sort of get the presentation from the city manager, and usually don't spend hours getting into it this evening, but certainly we can if you want to. But with that, I'll open it up for questions from the council. Councilmember Schroeder.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Clarification point, if you could go to attachment 2 graph, which talks about the city tax levy from 2020 to 2024.
Sure. Yep.
Here, is the levy increase supposed to be the difference between 2023 and 2024?
It is, and just before this meeting, I was looking at those numbers, and it's a little bit short of that.
Yeah, because I come up with a 1,962,391, the difference between the two. And so I was wondering, is the graph incorrect and the levy increase correct?
The levy increase is correct.
So then
the graph,
one of the
yeah.
numbers, the 2023 or the 2024 number is not correct?
24 number is correct, the 28 million. 23 number.
The 23 number includes the EDA levy. That's the difference. It should be
Is that
20.
the only difference?
Yeah.
The problem is I pulled these numbers and didn't double check with her. I was using past information, so it's on me. But that 28,785,280 is the correct levy number for 2024.
Okay, so the 23 needs
Without
to
the
have
EDA.
the EDA
Yeah.
number taken out of
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Okay, I just wanted that
So it'll be
clarification
3 years.
point.
Either add it
Actually, the
to
other
the
years.
one or
yeah,
take it out of the
yeah,
other.
yeah. I tried to keep it just on the city levy because
I just, because this is the presentation we're
Yeah.
giving people, that's why I wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that it's correct.
In your packet, attachment 3 has the correct levy numbers.
That-
we'll
that
make-
the-
just the city levy.
Okay.
City levy.
Thank
And we'll
you.
correct that,
Yeah.
so when this is
On
put on
that.
the website. Yeah.
And then on the, again, attachment to the summary of city manager proposed 2024, where it shows the increase that impacts the value of the houses. Let's see, is there a page number on here?
Just 2 slides.
Yeah, 2 slides. How's that?
That-
There. On that one, you show other services and charges. That's a really big number in here. And so I know you had provided me with some details on this, and if you dig through, you can get it. But I would suggest that we might want to break that down a little further.
So-
Because when you say other, in my head, when I think other, it should be, yeah.
Yeah, so a couple things there. It is certainly a big number, and we're just trying to summarize the categories. If you look at the budget, is it attachment 3 or 4 is by function. We have broken down each division by personnel services, supplies, materials, other services, and capital. So that's just the sum of all those different things. But I understand that it's not descriptive, but it does cover a lot of different things. And I don't know if we just remove the word other or provide some additional detail.
This is actually the categories that are in our annual comprehensive financial report, and that is standard reporting language. It is quite a large number simply because the proprietary funds are included in that.
Which that would be the water, what we're paying St. Paul. So
Wa-
that, I guess in a way, it's almost like you'd want to break that out separately, because that's a big number. I know you
Yeah.
talk about it later on. It doesn't give the exact number, but again, my point being, I think it would be nice to break it down. a
We could
little
put some
more.
notes in there, maybe have
Yeah.
a subset. But it's kind of the culmination of all the different
I know.
divisions, kind of just lumped
Yeah.
together, just as a summary basis, and the details are in each of those different things.
And then when people ask me questions on it, it's easier if I have a little, versus having to have them dig a little further on that. And then just for clarification too, with all the comp adjustments, that's over 9% is what we're looking at, right? With the step increases, the study adjustments, and the COLA. That's over 9% increase in
In salary?
salary
In compensation.
compensation.
Personal services.
Well, it could be.
If you add those 3 together. It
Yeah,
looks like it's
it
about-
it could be, yeah. So once again, I'm trying to put a cap on.
Right, I'm just, for me, this, is how big of a number
Yeah,
that
yeah,
is
yeah.
as a percentage
Right,
wise.
right.
It's about.
Yeah, you got the combination of the COLA, 3%, which we know, at least. And the other part really depends on the market, and each person's gonna maybe experience it differently, but
Yes,
overall, you
yes.
know.
And then
you can
it's
say
just
that.
more of the total on there.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, those are just a few left. And I won't go into the detail tonight, but thank you.
Other questions or feedback from council members on this initial presentation? Oops.
I feel like a door just opened on Star Trek.
Yeah, I guess the ability to silence my phone doesn't cover that aspect of it. But anyway, I did want to note that, we haven't necessarily communicated this this way before, but sometimes it might be helpful to sort of have the operating category and the capital category so that people can see sort of what's changing, because what sometimes affects our total budget change each year is that we're spending a lot more money on capital, because maybe we're doing a bunch of big water projects, or, buying a big fire truck or something like that. And so that can make the capital number go way up, but because it's included in the overall budget number, that can make, the budget change, significant. And it might help people understand, what's contributing to the change in the budget, if we can note that aspect of it separately. Clearly, as was noted, the compensation piece is in the operating side, and that will definitely be a significant impact to the budget as well. So,
Yep.
but it can be helpful for folks to understand that, and I know we haven't necessarily sort of highlighted it exactly that way in our communications before, but it might be helpful to look at that, look at a way to do that as we go forward.
And I noticed that when we had the OVO added into the budget of $5 million, we saw this big jump.
Right,
And that was like, what's happening? Well, that reason the budget went up is because we have an expenditure of $5 million. that it can be offset by state funding for it, so it's kind of money in, money out, but it's still part of the budget, so.
Yeah.
One of the attachments, attachment 6 in the packet, lots of paper in the packet. But that explains all of the expenditure changes from 23 to 24 by the various functional categories. So if somebody really wants to see what's changing on the tax-supported versus fee-supported side, that reconciliation is intended to provide the major changes.
But I think we could summarize those, as kind of what's driving this, what the difference is, and break it down on those categories.
Got it, thank you. Other questions or feedback? Great. I noted that the Finance Commission meets before we get the updated information from the county, right? So they will also not
No,
have that.
they won't have it.
They won't have that?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. So they will be
Yeah.
as eager for it as we are on the council here.
And typically, they would have met before this meeting, so we
Right.
moved it, not
Yeah.
knowing that we'd be off by one day. But
And for what it may be worth, and I know this is without the final numbers from the county, but based on what the county gave us earlier this year as part of their county auditor's report, I think the 8.99% increase to the levy, theoretically based on calculations that I've done in my own spreadsheet for years, seems to indicate about a 7% increase for the average single-family property. So for what that's worth, take that with the same grain of salt as not having any information, but at least it's something. Anything else from the council? Right, I really do appreciate all the work that goes into this day and this presentation, not certainly just by the city manager and the finance director, but all the department heads and staff leaders at other levels, because there's a lot of tough decisions throughout the whole process, even before things maybe get to the request to the city manager portion. So we understand that it's a constant effort, as much as it is in any business or any household, to try to weigh what you need to do, what you want to do, and how you're going to be able to pay for it. So certainly it's something that we continue to wrestle with, and as was noted by the city manager, we've got factors including cost changes from the city of St. Paul for water purchases, which we basically just passed through, as well as from the Met Council for processing our sewer, sanitary sewer, which we can't not do in either one of those, and then also the whole side of it related to personnel, and one to do the best we can to do right by our employees and properly value their contributions to the work that is done on behalf of the citizens. More discussion to come, more information to come, as was noted. This is kind of a cliffhanger, so we'll look forward to those next opportunities. And certainly, all this information is or will be available online under the 2024 budget category for folks that may be interested in it. And feedback is always welcome to the city council or the city manager or the finance director. We'll all hear about it one way or the other. So we do appreciate that from the public as well. And there will be several opportunities through this process for the public to weigh in before we make our final decisions. So with that, thank you again. And we'll take a moment to reset here as we move on to the next item on our agenda this evening. Oh, and the first thing I saw as I was looking at the agenda was receive the 2024 city manager budget. I almost did the same item twice here, but I'll save us all from that.
Let's see if I change it.
Yes, the next item on our agenda under business items is item 7C, which is to have a discussion regarding potential ordinance language as we look to handle the sacred communities that have been set up under state law in the last legislative session in our own city code. And I believe we have our Community Development Director, Janice Gunlock, here with us this evening to initiate this conversation with the council and present some information and analysis that is part of the staff report, which we'll look forward to having a conversation about as we start to look at this issue. With that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Gunlock. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I think most of you are aware of this, so I won't go into a ton of detail. The legislature did adopt some rules regarding sacred communities and micro-unit dwellings. That law will go into effect on January 1st. As a municipality, we have a decision to make in terms of how we want to address these within our zoning code, and we really have two options. One is to consider them a permitted use, and the second option is to consider them as a conditional use. If you go with the latter, we don't necessarily have to do anything to our code, because the way the law is written is it's implied that if your code doesn't address these, they shall be considered as conditional uses. The interesting part to that is the law specifically says that you can't impose any additional conditions that are not otherwise addressed in the law. Given that language is in there, staff has proposed in the written materials that we include these as permitted accessory uses, accessory in the sense that they are accessory to a religious institution. They have to be placed on a religious institution's property or property adjacent to one. And so we've outlined some simple amendments to the code that could be made to address it in that manner, but really we're just looking for feedback from the city council on how you would like to proceed, so we can have some time to address any needed code amendments before that January 1st effective date. I should clarify, we do have one in town that's currently being governed as a interim use. I'm not aware of any others that are proposed, if that's a concern that you might have, but that existing one may or may not be affected by whatever decisions you make. So with that, I'll try and address any questions you might have. I know the city attorney might be as helpful or more helpful than me in addressing those questions, so it'll be a team effort.
Great, thank you, Ms. Gunlock. And I just wanted to clarify a couple of things to begin with. So once again, under the state law that was passed, the city or cities have the option of either permitting these uses as permitted uses in our zoning code, or we can permit them as conditional uses. We just can't add any conditions beyond what is called for in the requirements that are in the state statute, and I'm understanding that correctly.
That's how we understand it.
So, and one of the questions I had asked to staff before this evening was, certainly for a lot of permitted uses in the city, practically all permitted uses in the city, we have a number of standards that we have in our zoning code. Buildings cannot be taller than this. Density of units per acre, a lot of requirements like that. And so one of my questions was, how much or to what extent could we apply those types of standards to a permitted use in our zoning code under the state law? And I believe the response I got was practically none. Am I understanding that right?
There's some nods out in the
Mayor, that appears to be the case.
Okay.
It's not explicitly clear. It doesn't say permitted use can't have any conditions. It just says conditional use can't have any conditions, but I can't see a rational interpretation that would be the intent of the legislature, that the permitted use could add conditions, but the conditional use cannot.
Yeah, and I guess where I was going with this was, especially something like units per acre, where when we're looking at development, we're concerned about the density, we're concerned about the number of trips that are generated, may not be a factor in this type of development, granted, but there's factors along those lines that are all part of what we consider. And if we can't do anything along those lines, that becomes concerning, because in my mind then, a potential a faith community could come in with a proposal on a very small lot to put 75 micro units on, and as long as it meets the state requirements, we don't really have the ability to say, my gosh, that's way too much density on a small lot, for a whole host of health, safety, and general welfare reasons. Am I understanding correct that we can't potentially have that kind of limitation if we call this a permitted use?
I have one thought, but I know the city attorney might be able to clarify, is under the requirements of the bill, there's a whole section about the sacred community requirements, and it says a sacred community under this section must, and then there's a couple of things in there. And one of the things is provide the municipality with a written plan approved by the religious institution's governing body that outlines adequate parking, lighting, and access to units by emergency vehicles. So one point the city attorney made in the communications with you and I, Mayor, is that to the extent that their plan does not adequately address access to the units by emergency vehicles, there might be some ability for the city to intervene there, and that might have some impact on density, if the concern is how many of these things are you putting into a size property to make sure that emergency vehicles can still safely access the units. And parking too.
Certainly, okay. So the plan is provided to the city, but it's approved by the governing body of the institution. The city doesn't necessarily have a approval step on that plan. We just receive the plan and perhaps provide insight from our perspective, I guess. Okay. Ms. Tierney.
You have it all correct, Mayor. I think that we would probably need to be somewhat creative in order to enforce those kinds of standards. But as I shared with Ms. Gunlock, I can't see a court telling us that we have to allow a settlement to go in that we would be unable to protect as a city. So I think that there are certain life safety requirements that, regardless of what the state law said, the city would be able to enforce just as a matter of common sense.
Okay. And I don't mean to hog this from the rest of the council here, but so one of the things that's in the state law is that at the very end of the law, it says microunits must comply with municipal setback requirements established by ordinance for manufactured homes. If a municipality does not have such an ordinance, microunits must be set back on all sides by at least 10 feet. I have questions about exactly how that's interpreted, but I do note, and I believe was provided to the council, was our section of our code related to setbacks for manufactured homes. We've got front yard setbacks, side yard setbacks, et cetera, setback from streets and exterior boundaries. And then we've got one category in our code which is called distance between mobile homes 20 feet. And I guess given that that's not called a setback, I'm not sure we can enforce that as a setback. Although in the state law, they talk about 10 feet on all sides, and I don't know if that means 10 feet on all sides of each unit or 10 feet on all sides of the cluster of units. So I would be curious. Obviously, 10 feet is not bad. We have 5-foot side yard setbacks, I believe, for residential properties that could be 10 feet apart, and so that's not terrible. But I just wanted to raise that point as kind of a potential language question and interpretation or enforcement issue. But like I said, if in fact the state law is saying the units themselves must be 10 feet apart, that may get to that issue, and we may just want to get somebody to interpret that correctly for us.
Honestly, I don't know that the legislatures understand fully what some of these regulations say, so I certainly can't speak to what they thought they meant by writing that section and how our existing code would apply. I don't know.
So it could be settled by litigation, then, is what you're saying.
I definitely think the intention was from periphery property boundaries. Whether or not there was an intention on a separation of the individual units themselves, I don't know. And I don't know that they know.
All right, council, other questions? Councilmember Strong.
I don't know that you have the answer, or you know this. I just know when I read about it initially, I was concerned that maybe some church facilities might be able to put housing like on front yards or, on Lexington between the street and their property. Is there anything that would prevent that if they had 10 feet around it? Or, I mean, I don't know that I would want to live in the middle of the intersection when the setback for the church is even much farther than that.
So my thought is, if you're concerned about like a front yard setback, the setback standards for our manufactured home park is what would apply, and we provided those as a bench handout.
Okay.
I don't recall offhand what the front yard
20.
one is, but it's in that table.
20 feet.
Okay.
But from the public right of way, it's 50.
Oh, good point.
So we have some of these things that would apply per what's written in the state law. These things actually provide a fair amount of setback rules. So the mayor's making note that it says front yard setback, and then it just says side yard, doesn't say setback, rear yard says nothing, doesn't say rear yard. So the question is, should that be corrected in our own code language so it's really clear?
Perhaps.
And mobile homes should probably be called manufactured.
And they are. Yeah.
Manufactured home park, yeah, sorry. If I did that wrong.
Otherwise, it seems like we don't have a lot of options necessarily, so it seems to make sense that conditional use doesn't make sense if you can't apply other conditions. Just to fully inform everybody about, part of the conversation I had was, could we permit up to so many units on a site and then make more than that number of units, say, conditional use, to give us a little bit more flexibility to look at some of those density issues, and the answer I got was no, so.
I think you could do it, but I don't think it would allow you to impose any density standards. You could certainly call more than a certain number of units a conditional use and have hearings on it. You just
You just
wouldn't be
couldn't
able to
apply any
impose
other
any
standards to
conditions.
it, right, yes, okay. Right. Well, council, it seems like our direction to staff is gonna be pretty easy here. Councilmember?
I don't want to make a motion yet, but I would note that I agree with you, and that I think that part of what we should be looking for is to have this manufactured home park setbacks and rules come back to make sure our language is super clear. We don't need to change any of the numbers, but making sure the language is clear to reduce confusion in the future.
Setback.
Well, I was gonna say, if it gets us any benefit, to call it a setback between mobile homes instead of distance between mobile homes, because it's got the word setback in it, maybe we should think about that. But once again, I'm not sure that it's critical, because perhaps 10 feet under the state law is fine too, and that's something that we can certainly have our staff weigh in on as to what their perspective is.
And to your point, Mr. Groff, it does say mobile homes within some of the categories, and manufactured home is at the top, which is why you're hearing us say different things.
Yes, consistency
So
would be.
a couple of language things here that could
Yeah,
make this clearer and more
manufactured home.
appropriate.
And then mobile home.
Anything else from the council, Councilmember Strawn?
Another question for Ms. Gunlock. So this is a unit under 400 square feet, is that correct? And then is there a next category to what constitutes a cottage home? Is there like a next category, and do we have the ability to make any changes or address that, or is that something we should consider in the future of what constitutes possibly? I know this because the city of Duluth put into, kind of out into the system, 18 micro houses that are like 800 square feet or 700 square feet, something like that. Just wondering if we need to consider what that next.
So somebody wanting to take advantage of this legislation has to meet these requirements.
Okay.
Full stop. If you want to build a 401 square foot unit, you are considered a courtyard cottage under our zoning code and would have to meet all of the zoning requirements, meet the building code, connected to sewer and water, etc.
Okay, thank you.
Right, like I said, it seems like, unless council has any other thoughts, that the direction of staff is basically to look at, as they discussed, doing this as a permitted use, update the code language as appropriate, pay special attention to the manufactured home table and language there, and consistency of manufactured home versus mobile home, et cetera. Anything I missed?
No.
I think making sure that Councilmember Etton's comment about, the right of way and stuff, just all the different things so that it's maybe all in one place, because people may not look at it as.
It's
That
in the
is
table.
in this table.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah. All right. Thank you for bringing this forward, and it turned out our discussion was a lot easier, simpler, maybe is a better way to put it, than I was expecting it to be when the law first was proposed in the legislative session. Second item, from a land use perspective, is a discussion regarding adoption of a reasonable accommodation ordinance, somewhat related, and we have our, I always mess up your title, Brian, I apologize, but
Senior planner.
our senior planner, Brian Lloyd, with us this evening.
Thank you, and this too will be a rather brief presentation. It has come to us, as it does sometimes. Somebody is interested in establishing a sober home in Roseville, and the zoning code doesn't expressly prohibit sober homes, but the nature of of any dwelling is that a family, by any one of the definitions of family in the zoning code, can occupy that unit, whether they're just raising kids, or whether they're sort of supporting each other in their sobriety. A family is a family if it meets any of those definitions. But because the limit on the number of unrelated individuals in a household is 4, that doesn't allow for the effective management and operation of sober homes. And because addiction to alcohol is identified as a disability as far as fair housing law is concerned, the city does need to have a reasonable accommodations policy to allow for review and potentially approval of more people living in a given home to sort of support each other in this way. It would be this reasonable accommodation idea is, providing for that place that the zoning code doesn't otherwise allow for in a way that is, consistent with the purpose and intent of the zoning code, even if it doesn't meet the strict standards of the number of individuals in a household. And so to sort of begin this conversation and seek the council's direction, we've come to you tonight with a draft of an ordinance for kind of starting that discussion. And the city attorney, again, is going to be, as with the last conversation, probably of more help than we as staff are, in sort of making sense of it and understanding what the obligations are and so forth.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lloyd, and I appreciate the draft ordinance in here, and I promise this time the council can take the lead on the conversation. So I'll open it up to the council for questions to staff. I mean, I'd be happy to, but Councilmember Adden.
Looking at the folks who reached out about this, they're talking about up to 24 residents living on site. And as I think about that, and I think about how we create, you have some nice categories in this proposed language. Thinking about the health impacts for the folks who are living there. I don't know many homes that, in the traditional sense of living in the home, can have 24 people in them in the city of Roseville. So is it reasonable, thinking about that there is a cap of 2 or 3 people per bedroom in a home or things of that, thinking about number of people per bathroom facility? Are those kinds of things something that we can do? Think about impact on neighbors. If you had 20 or 24 people living in a place and all of them had cars, now you're talking about a parking lot. And barring a parking lot, not many of our homes have parking lots with them, you're talking about a fairly large impact on the neighbors, whether it's just general parking available for their homes, or if there's a snow event, where do you put 20 cars? So what kinds of things can we have? These are just a few examples I was thinking about, both for the health and welfare of the folks who are staying in the place, then as well as the impacts beyond the place itself on the neighborhood.
And I would defer to the city attorney, I don't know the kind of parameters that are available for us in those kinds of situations.
Councilmember Etten, those are appropriate considerations. I would encourage you not to get too far into this one application.
Sure.
What I can tell you is that sober houses it's certainly a growing model nationwide. And the issue of sober homes going into cities is being litigated, I'm going to go with like crazy.
Okay.
It's
Nice,
being
that's very legal.
yes, very technical term. I can explain it later. So it's a very evolving part of the law, and it is also very unpredictable where a court will land. All of those factors are kind of fact-based factors. Everything you're going to look at is to kind of weigh facts and make a decision. The purpose of the ordinance is to do just what you're saying, outline what should we be looking at, what's relevant for us when we're making this consideration. And so, when these cases come before you, the record that you make is going to be very important, and how thoughtful you are is going to be very important. But to answer your actual question, I think those considerations would be very appropriate.
Okay. Yeah. Someone else could come in with 15 residents. That's still more than most Roseville homes could accommodate in a normal living situation. even if you have bunk beds in a room and things like that, and then thinking about parking or thinking about other effects with having that many people in a home. So those are the kinds of things that I thought about right away.
Well, and I think the particular application at 24 just stood out as quite a high number.
Absolutely.
And so I think that creates the question.
But it creates a question about where would we want to, where is the thoughtful line for what kind of accommodations work for human beings there, and then their impacts beyond that, even if it's not 24.
Well, and Councilmember Etten, just to jump in uninvited, a bright line is fairly indefensible. Part of reasonable accommodation and the concept of reasonable accommodation is an individualized assessment of the situation. What are the needs, and what are the consequences, and how can those needs be met? And so it would not be okay for the city to say no more than 3 per bedroom. You need to do an individualized assessment of the situation every time.
And it's a good point to note that I was just looking in chapter 906, our building maintenance code, we do have occupancy limitations related to sleeping quarters. But once again, I think the point of the reasonable accommodation is to say, yes, you've got that, but how does that apply, or does that apply to the situation that's being looked at here under the other standards or additional standards that we have to consider? Councilmember Strong.
I'd also like to weigh in as, from the HR perspective, this is still a business. And so there's going to need to be staff who staff these sober housing locations. And my experience, actually having worked in with sober housing, is that the staff had to have a private bedroom under their staff regulations. So there needs to at least be 1 or more locations where a staff person would have access to a private location where they could be sleeping and housed as well. So you just can't say, 5 bedrooms, that's 10 people. You have to make sure that they have the allotted space. And just in that regard too, we had folks who had sex offender status who were in the buildings, and so considering how that would play out with the neighborhoods, especially if there was any type of notification process and what the time frame would be. We also had people regularly ODing in the building, so access to our public safety folks, and how, again, making sure that parking and other things, that there was accessibility to the building. And I'm not saying that we can make those choices, but I do think it's important to know that those are things that are, and then just the violence that was around. A lot of people are attempting to be sober, but a lot of them are living kind of, they're not sure. Life is still, and they have people that they hang with that maybe aren't quite ready for them to be in that situation. So I think it's really good to know that maybe the safety of that building, we really need to do everything we can in our power to make changes, because my experience was this was a neighborhood where they only had 8 per house, and there was 4 houses in a row, and they shared staff, but they walked across. This was in the city. This was much different. It really depends, but I think, again, it would depend individually, but I'd want to know what their reimbursement rate is. If they're getting reimbursed the same for 1 or 4, then they're obviously going to try to squeeze 4 people into each of those units. So, just some considerations.
Right. Other questions or thoughts?
A type of licensing then and inspections?
I think it's kind of a zoning decision almost.
It is a zoning decision. Different cities have tried to license it with kind of minimal success about using that as much of a tool to control. You could apply rental licensing because it is rental property. And there may be some regulatory options, which I'm happy to look into. But mainly what we're talking about in terms of accommodation is going to be the density.
I went through this, or sort of observed this process before in another city with somebody I knew who was looking to put in a sober home in that community. And in that particular community, the decision-making was done by the city council, And so I wanted to ask, sort of, I know the sort of the proposed draft ordinance is to have it a staff decision appealable to the city council as the Board of Adjustments and Appeals. From your experience in working with lots of cities and your firm's experience, is that the preferred model as opposed to having the decision made by the city council appealable, I guess, to the city council then?
Mayor, a lot of cities are doing exactly this. This is a pretty common ordinance. If you look around, you're going to find it. And the issue is, essentially what you're doing is you're allowing staff to approve. And if it gets denied, it will be appealed. And then that will come to the council.
Okay, all right. Councilmember Strawn.
Curious, I know we have a lot of senior living facilities within the city, like assisted living, board and lodge facilities. I can't imagine that it's profitable for them to have 4 or less people. I know they don't necessarily need to have licensing, but I'm wondering, this seems like this may also impact a fair amount of, like, there's a lot of probably organizations that are operating without being in compliance with this piece. Do we have any information along those lines?
Sort of as how,
A congregate setting where there's more than 4 unrelated adults that are living in the same facility. I'm wondering if it should be approached
so.
similar?
well, yeah, so there is a.
Single-family homes or
Yeah, like-
larger?
No, like near me, I know there's at least 3 facilities that are actually healthcare facilities that I have no idea how many people live there, but I'm certain it's more than 4 unrelated people, especially.
Group home.
Group home. Mhm.
Which under the, it can be 6, and that supersedes sort of the 4 unrelated.
Is that under our city code or state law? Or
State law.
The zoning code also reflects that as a permitted use because the state law says it is. And it's, serving up to 4, or excuse me, up to 6 residents, who are receiving the care, and also a care provider, would be there as well. So, household of up to 7.
And is that distinguishable from the notion of a sober home setting? I mean, or do the same standards apply to both, I guess, is something I'm trying to understand.
That's why.
If it's licensed by state law, then then it's regulated under state law. One of the big differences is that sober homes are not licensed under the state, and so they're not regulated.
Gotcha.
And to clarify, the reasonable accommodation ordinance that I'm recommending is, would apply to any kind of accommodation. There could be another kind of group, similar group, that would apply in this way or another way. This is really all I hear about right now, but that doesn't mean that nothing else exists this ordinance should be here for those applications as well. So it is a best practice.
Other questions? Councilmember Schroeder.
Not a question, but a comment. I actually thought this was a good proposal on what we should do for an ordinance. So I'm in favor of how this is written. It makes a lot of sense to me. And especially now that I hear that we didn't invent this, that it's been, that other cities are already doing this. So that gives me comfort that it's already been used and had an opportunity to have litigation against it. And so to me, then that makes sense that we would adopt something that's already standing.
Well, and Councilmember Schroeder, for your information, for the whole council's information, this particular ordinance I took from Anoka, which was squarely before a federal district court in the 8th Circuit, who commented favorably in their opinion about the ordinance.
So, thank you.
All right. Anything else from the council on this? I think the only other thing I might say is I'm not sure that it belongs in Title I versus Title 10, the zoning code, so that they'll leave that to people who think about those things.
We can figure out what title it fits well in. We really just wanted to understand if the
Exactly.
council wanted
Yeah.
to move forward.
Yeah, no, I got that. I just wanted to put that out there because always trying to think about where to put something that makes it the most likely to be easily accessed by users, and including our own staff and council people. All right. Thank you, everyone, on that, and appreciate that. And at the time that I was observing this process in another community, it was a number of years ago, and I kind of thought, I wonder if Roseville has anything like that. But the issue never came up, and I forgot about it and moved on to other things. And so it's interesting to see how it came back.
And here it is now.
Yes, exactly. So, and I appreciate the attorney taking the initiative to say, you need one of these.
Yes.
Yeah, all right. Thanks again. We'll look forward to that item coming back then.
Mayor,
Councilmember Strawn.
I do note that the Department of Human Services convened a task force on sober housing in 2022. I don't see that they came up with a decision as of yet, but it is likely that in the moving forward, we will have some direction from the state of Minnesota.
Well, I was going to suggest we may want to think about during our discussion about legislative priorities if we want to advocate for the state to do something in terms of perhaps licensing and regulating these types of
Yeah,
facilities.
looks like they convened a pretty wide array of organizations and met for at least 4 or 5 times to come up with some future plans, so.
Oh, that's good to know. Thank you. All right. That then brings us to city minutes, city council minutes. We've got the minutes of our July 24th and August 7th meetings, and I did want to especially thank staff and I believe Ms. Tierney for a second go-through on the July 24th one to accurately or adequately reflect the presentation and discussion on the cannabis legislation. I felt that the original draft was rather sparse in relation to that, and so I really did appreciate that coming back with additional language. With that, are there any changes or corrections noted by council members or a motion to approve? Councilmember Atten?
Can we separate these two?
We certainly can.
One and not the other one, please.
We absolutely can. So as to the meeting minutes of the July 24th meeting, is there either any changes or corrections noted by council members or a motion to approve as presented?
So moved.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Atten, seconded by Councilmember Groff to approve the July 24th minutes as presented. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Sustained.
Opposed? All right. And one abstention. So that passes 4-0 with Councilmember Schroeder abstaining. All right. And then we have our minutes of our August 7th meeting. Is there a motion related to those or any additional changes or corrections?
Move approval.
It's been moved by Councilmember Groff. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Schroeder. Any discussion on the motion to approve the minutes of August 7th? All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Abstain.
One abstention. 2 abstentions, right. Okay, that passes 3-0 with Councilmembers Atten and Strawn in abstention. Got it, okay. I think I kept it all straight. That concludes consideration of our meeting minutes as presented. The next then is our consent agenda with the exception of item F, which was dealt with earlier, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Trudgeon to introduce the remaining consent items.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 10A approves payments in the amount of $1,932,152.12. Item 10B approves 2 temporary liquor licenses for Bent Brew Distillery for events to be held on September 9th and October 26th. Item 10C approves purchase of 6 radios and 4 Dodge Durango marked squads for the police department. Due to supply chain issues, none of these items will be received until 2024. Item 10D approves a resolution approving the city sewer availability charge, or SAC, credit policy regarding the use of credits to help retain and attract small businesses. This policy was discussed at previous city council meetings, and staff recommends its approval. Item 10E certifies unpaid utility and other charges to the property tax rule. Item 10F was removed and taken up as a separate action. Item 10G approves an antenna lease agreement with the Dish Wireless at the Alta Vista Tower. And item 10H approves an amendment to the antenna lease agreement with Singular Wireless at the Alta Vista Tower. Item 10I adopts a resolution prohibiting parking on Dale Street by the Harriet Alexander Nature Center. Item 10J adopts a resolution prohibiting parking on Dale Street from Larpenteur Avenue to Lowell Avenue. Item 10K authorizes the purchase order for Flagship Recreation for playground engagement, design, equipment, and installation at the new park at 2381 County Road B. And finally, agenda item 10L adopts a resolution to accept a donation from the Roseville Police Foundation for the purchase of 2 smaller drones for police use. And that is the consent agenda.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. Is there a motion from the council on the consent agenda with the exception of item F?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved by Councilmember Schroeder, seconded by Councilmember Etten. Discussion on the motion. I do just want to take a moment to thank the Roseville Police Foundation for their donation that we're accepting by our action this evening, and appreciate the second look at the no parking on Dale Street by the Nature Center.
Yep.
That was previously before us and then was pulled for a further review, and it looks like what came out was good. If there's no other discussion on the consent items, we've got the motion before us to approve them. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Those items are approved. That then brings us to the future agenda review. I'll turn it back over to Mr. Trudgeon for that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Reminder, on this Thursday is commission applicant interviews. Hopefully you've received your packet and with the background information that it's be in this room on Thursday, starting at 6 p.m. September 11th then is our next regular city council meeting. We just have one item as of now, discussing the use of cannabis in public. We talked about that previously and wanted to bring that back for some further discussion. I would mention in September, at some point, we'd want to talk about the classification and compensation studies. Don't have a date for that yet, so expect that at some point. On the 18th, we have an EDA meeting, pretty straightforward, just in a budget approval, something you've seen before, but just officially recommending from the EDA, which are you folks, to the City Council, which are also you folks, but we have to take that formal action. And then there is a grant we're looking to accept for the Community Land Trust from the county. On the September 18th meeting, Finance Commission recommendation on our budget, and then the MnDOT staff people will be here for Highway 36 presentation, talking about the future of that. On the 25th, the main highlight right now, at least, is the approved preliminary budget and levy. So that's all I have for future agenda. One other thing I want to mention, we do have a Roseville Business Council this Wednesday morning, and we'll have Julie Warren from Visit Roseville to give us a presentation on the state of the hospitality industry. So we'll be in this room at 7:30 in person. You can also join online if you can't make it here in person, and we welcome you all to be here.
Great, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. Are there questions on the upcoming agendas or any councilmember initiated items for future meetings or other announcements or communications from council members? Councilmember Strawn.
I think you're all on it, but the Lowry Avenue stakeholders meeting is coming up in September. If you're not involved and you want to be.
And that's for the proposed bus rapid transit, I believe, on that route that goes from Roseville or Rosedale west into Minneapolis.
Yeah, and terminates at the Robbinsdale Transit Center.
Right.
And currently, Route 32 is free until the end of 2024. However, they are about ready to do a major change in Lowry, so where that's going to go in the interim, it's maybe free because you have to be really open to adventure if you're involved. But just know that that's often been a concern as people want to know about that east-west transportation, and so I think anything we can do on this end to voice give voice to that would be helpful, I think.
Right. And that's September 27th, I believe, was the date on
I
that.
believe that's when they've, moved it back to. Could there be confirmation on when the confirmation of the commission decision, will that come back on the next meeting on the 11th?
September 11th, yes,
September
I'm sorry, I
11th.
didn't have that on
Okay.
there. Yeah, I think it was on.
Usually what it is. the
Yeah,
next
September
meeting, so-
11th.
Yeah, can you confirm, maybe have Rachel confirm with us when she wants that information back by?
Sure, we'll send out an email, but you can count on September 11th would be the decision.
Okay.
I would imagine we'd want, well,
The week before.
the norm is to try to get it by the packet deadline of the week before the meeting.
but
The
doesn't-
practice has been sometimes it's the day of the meeting, so it
Right.
just depends. Assuming we interview everybody at the interviews, that may make the process move a little more expeditiously. Right. And just noting two things related to Rice and Larpenteur. We had the Rice and Larpenteur Alliance Summer Block Party this last week?
Was it last weekend? Yeah.
And it was very well attended. A great time was had by all, I think, even the Yellow Jackets that were there.
Yeah.
2 weekends ago.
Two weekends ago?
Week and a half
Okay.
ago.
Okay, got it. See, that's what I was trying to remember. And I know we didn't have a meeting in intervening. And then I believe also the route that goes up and down Rice Street is also free right now. And it may be related to both of those being considered for bus rapid transit, so that might be part of it. So, all right. Anything else from council members? Otherwise, the only thing left on our agenda is a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Etten, second by Councilmember Strawn. No discussion on a motion to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and we are adjourned at 7:58. Thank you, everyone.